You're listening to Veterans of Color, a podcast that dives into the cultural and historical realities of people of color within the United States military. Join your host, Mike Kim, a veteran and independent military culture researcher at Columbia University, as he explores the rich contributions, complexities, paradoxes, and challenges of these extraordinary individuals and events often forgotten in military history. Now, here's your host, Mike Kim.
On this episode of VOC, we are joined by the man, the Marine, one of my heroes in the New York veteran scene, because he doesn't stigmatize me for my unique looks and politics, but he's a well-respected man and has been honored by the borough of Queens for being a stellar veteran. And we have here Edie Argueta, and I'm so impressed that you're able to join us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm one of three Marines. My two younger brothers are also Marines. Morris and Franklin, and I'm the father of three, husband, son, man, myth, the legend.
Yes.
But I currently live in Maspeth. I work in healthcare.
Yeah.
And, like Mike was saying, I was recently honored by the Queensborough President, Donovan Richards, with a citation of honor. And now we're here.
Yeah. And the only reason why I wanted you to fill in the details is because I'm much older and I have gaps in memory, and you're more attention to detail. And I just wanted folks to know that, because in our veteran community, veterans are forgotten. Those important veterans are forgotten, like you, I feel. And in our larger society, veterans are overlooked. So when something like this comes up, it's important for me to have eyes on it, and also to have other people have eyes on it. And it wasn't an empty award. Wasn't an empty citation. It was one of those true ones, because you've been involved in helping veterans directly and indirectly for years. And yeah, I just I don't know if you realize this, but I posted on my Facebook a photo that you and I were in like 10 years ago or something at the VFW, and we both have our campaign covers. Is that right? Campaign covers, right? I mean, there's another
more colorful term for that we use.
Right. But remember that picture?
I do. Yeah, it's one of my favorite pictures, actually.
Yeah. And that was when I first met you, and I was introduced to you, and you were part of the historic VFW post in Astoria. What was it? So it got back then, this was during the War on Terror, so a lot of people forget, but that was like one of the posts in the country. Yeah, there we go. I was a lot skinnier, and you were like bulked up. That's awesome. I love it. Tell me, so there's something famous about that post throughout the country. It got high recognition. What can you fill in what I'm saying to the audience regarding that period?
Yes. So that post, the reason why we were even featured in the VFW magazine, we were the post that had the most OIF veterans. At one point, I think our roles, 40 people would come to the meetings and stuff. OIF veterans. Of course, we never forgot about all the other ones. We did have some Gulf War, They used to also, the Korean War vets used to show up, Vietnam War, but over the years, they because of their age, they start to pass away or they can't make it anymore. But that was one of the things, is that it was a unique post because um, where other posts were struggling to get members of those eras, of those wars, we were able to like capture like lightning in a bottle, and use that to attract more,
Yeah.
because in like-minded veterans.
And the activities were awesome too, right? Like I met you at that activity, I believe it was Memorial Day actually this weekend, like
Yeah, I think we
10
met
years
before
ago.
that, but that was the time we really got to sit down and brass tacks talk
Yeah.
about things.
Yeah. Yeah. About the veteran terrain. And we were, very idealistic.
Right,
And
right.
yeah,
Yeah, we used to host a lot of events. So we used to do a lot of things.
yeah,
Uh, we used to host a lot of events there, and then it was great. It was a good time.
that's awesome. And then can you let people know a little bit about your background? Because I like to capture who was the Marine or soldier, airman, coastie, sailor before he or she joined,
Okay.
uh, while they were in, who they were, and after, and what's going on now. But I like going through that kind of like trajectory because it gives a good life
Bigger
span,
picture. Yeah.
veteran centric lifespan, because there's a lot of people who do movies and documentaries and they only capture the war part or
Right.
the military part or a kid part or the post part. I saw a movie a couple years ago on just the kid part that I think Stephen King, no, David Mamet. I forgot, it was a movie about like kid naval cadets, but midshipmen, but it was like in England, and it was just like really interesting. But like I said, I always, after that movie, I was just like, well, how did these guys, what happened, to them, because this was like during the World War II, right? Pre-World War II era. So well, like where did they end up? So that's kind of like where I want to go with this. And this is VOC, Veterans of Color. And I just and I don't use it as a divisive thing, but I always like looking at the unique lives, because it's all about veteran voices and different platforms for those voices. And if I could do that through this platform, then I'm all for it. But I just have heard things about you, about your background, that are just, they're pretty epic, when you think about the human condition and the human spirit and the way you've been able to just maintain your character, and it's something that I want my son to have. And you're definitely someone with that.
Yeah. So I'm an immigrant myself. I came to this country when I was a little bit over 1 years old.
Mm.
My grandmother carried
What?
me
From where?
from El Salvador. So my family's from El Salvador.
Oh.
So in those days, it was probably like the tail end of the Civil War, but there were still things going on. And then
Mm.
my family left because of that. Uh, but my mom came before. And so then my grandma brought me over. And actually, so we crossed the border. My grandma in her arms as a 1 year old baby. My grandma brought me over, and years later I would get to talk to her about that, and she would tell me these stories about walking through Mexico, getting on, people helping along the way, and that was just impactful for me, and I've always carried that. So I was one of those, I came into this country. I don't want to say legally, but that was my situation. And
Yes.
then I reunited with my mother here in Jamaica, Queens, and that's where I grew up. And then I grew up. To be honest, I didn't even know what my legal status was until high school, until like I start looking at colleges, start trying to plan out my future. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have what they say papers. So then I ended up, so my mom was already working on that, but she did a really good job at, like, shielding us from a lot of those things, to the point where here I am, 16, 17 years old, and I never even realized that my legal status wasn't right, right. So then, it came through. I want to go to Syracuse University,
Wow.
and I had actually been accepted there.
Mm-hmm.
But in those days, by that time, September 11th had already happened. So I was very patriotic. We lived on 168th Street, down the street from the National Guard Armory, and I remember September 11th, seeing the Humvee pull up right in front, and I'm like, man. And I'd always been grateful to the country. I've always been grateful to the U.S. for what it did for me, what it's done for my family. So, in my mind, I was like, what was the way I want to pay back somehow? I want to, like, repay it back for generosity, for taking us in, you know. And then I remember I came home from school, second anniversary, I think it was. They were replaying the reading of the names, and like that's when I'm like, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna enlist.
Mm.
I'm
Wow.
gonna enlist. So my brother, when he was a recruiter, he looked he notified me. He's like, hey, did you know that you enlisted on 9/11? I'm like, no, I thought it was September 15th. But and that day I went right after I ran right after school. I walked right down to the recruiting station, and I went the long way because I didn't want my mom seeing me, because it would take me right in front of our building where we lived. So I went the long way, and so then I went. I was probably the easiest recruit for. He's a master sergeant now. Yes, for Sergeant Kitchens at the time, because I just walked in there like I want to go. So I enlisted. I was in the DEP program for a year. The whole time I knew
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go. Yeah. So a little bit the year two, but anyway. So and then I graduated high school, and August 4th on my birthday at 0403, that black van with the 18-seater is there in front of my house. So my mom's friend from childhood was visiting from El Salvador, and they saw me away, so, and then we went to Maps, did all, did that whole
Look
show.
at this. Did you eat any pupusas before?
I didn't.
You didn't? Gosh, what? I had to have kimchi before I went
I didn't.
to,
I just
to boot camp.
I didn't. I don't think I even.
Pupusa, tell people what pupusas are. I
Well,
love it.
pupusas is a dish from El Salvador. It's like a tortilla, but it's softer, made out of flour or corn. Yeah,
Yeah.
and corn, and it has a filling inside. It could be cheese, it could be beans,
Yeah.
vegetables, meat, and it's fried, and traditionally it's prepared by the older ladies. They're never gonna taste,
Yeah.
unless it's coming from a Salvadorian grandma. It's never gonna taste. Yeah. So, but yeah. So I met all the other police at the airport. We flew down, and I remember we walking into that airport down there in South Carolina, just like chit chatting with everybody, laughing, and then we see like 5 or 6 drone stalkers just running down the terminal, and that was the like we say in the military, the old moment. This is serious. So they make you call. Like my mom wasn't answering the phone. I was like, sir, nobody's picking up. But like you better make them pick up. I'm like, so I get back on the phone, and I pretended that my mom had picked up when nobody was picking up, and I pretended to be talking to my mom, and I hung up. And he's like, oh my god, you know, it was pretty. And then I graduated October 31st, and then went to motor T school. I'm a motor T operator. You know, did all the schools, and then I ended up with second CEB, the second Marine Division, and second CEB is the second Combat Engineer Battalion of the second Marine Division in Camp Lejeune.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so just to let people know, because we have audience folks from all different backgrounds and different ages and different periods of service and all that. With this war, what I noticed as far as the war, post 9/11 war, military service, there's a high emphasis on, unlike other wars, on mounted patrols, and this whole thing of motor T became almost like a phenomenon, because it was like those were like the most valuable guys, in regards to like, making sure you can even get out on a mission or salvage, or what I mean. It was just like, yeah, like pretty incredible work, motor T, just recognizing, because I was in the military, back the first time from 86, and then the last time, I got out in 2009. So I was able to see these different changes. So yeah, I mean, is that accurate?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I remember a specific incident back in Fallujah. I think it was the regiment, because we were combat team, RCT 7. That was Regimental Combat Team 7. So the regiment had their own motor pool. So I remember they had suffered some casualties, some losses. So then they had to drive to Fallujah to pick up the new Marines that had just arrived. And unlucky for them is that they hit an IED, and that IED, incapacitated the truck, where all the other, they didn't incapacitate it, but it wasn't up to full. It wasn't serviceable completely. Yeah. So the truck is limping along, and then that truck got hit with another IED, and the new Marines that they got there, that they had in the back of the truck, at least two of them suffered catastrophic injuries, and one lost his life. So imagine you're in country not even a few hours, and this is what happens to you. Later on, the vehicle commander would tell me he survived. He was like, man, if we had like your wrecker or you guys there to get us out of there quickly, repair what we needed, this would never happen, because they never would have had the chance to set up the way they did.
Yeah.
So, and people think that you just drive a truck, you just get in, but there's a lot of specialized training. There's a lot of specialized training and things to recognize, like things to recognize. And like this also brings to light a recent incident on Camp Lejeune. There was a truck overturned, 2 Marines died, and he was court-martialed, and then they're trying to take him to civil court. The families are, and what came out of that was that the whole chain, the whole system failed him because he didn't know. And I feel like maybe he didn't receive as much as specialized training as I did, because we recognize what to do in one instances, and how to position ourselves so that the troops are surrounding are protected, or what, and that was one thing. Like, I always thought, like, if things got really bad, I would put my truck in between our guys and the enemy, but yeah. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's there's different specializations in motor T too, different MOSs too. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, no, I was I love going to the motor pool, hanging out, learning, watching, just because it's I don't care what people kind of, I don't know, TV glorify, but it's all about shoot, moving, shoot, move, and communicate. And you can't do dismounted patrols in Iraq, all day, all night. You know what I mean? Like, not even a large percentage of patrols were dismounted. Most of them were mounted patrols, and then aspect of dismounted patrol. But you're going into areas how are you getting into those areas? You're getting in there through vehicles, victors, and and they demand, attention, and also the skills of operating them. It's a highly sophisticated situation. There's no other war like that,
The training never left me either, because I was always scanning the side of the road, up front, looking in the back rearview mirror. Once in a while, I'll just take a look to the periphery, looking around, just to see if I spotted those telltale signs. Sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't, and I find myself even now to this day, like I'm driving down the highway, I'm driving down my neighborhood, I'm like, oh, that's a good spot for an ambush. This is where they could line up. They would put, this is where the IED would be at. This, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But
Wow. Yeah. And then what, because when we talk about the Marine Corps and, other branches, they'll talk about their things, and I usually kind of laugh behind their faces. I'm just kidding. No, but I respect all the branches, but there's just something about like Marines and history and Iwo Jima, or like uh World War One, that that front, that World War One front, where they're called, the Germans, titled the Marines devil dogs because of the fierce fighting, Khe Sanh, and then you've got Fallujah for our period of, you know post 9/11, history, Fallujah, it was yeah, the most intense fighting. And it's not to glorify anything, but they call that the city of mosques, right? Like that,
right.
like a holy city. Is that what, like with Fallujah, like the that was something that the insurgents really wanted to kind of like keep and use as kind of like
They want to
operating.
capitalize.
Huh?
Yeah, they want to use it to their advantage.
Yeah, yeah. And then when you think about Fallujah, because like the way I thought about it recently, and not recently, but it was during COVID, and I really want you, if possible, to get that story. I mean, we're sharing it here, but like to get it on paper because it's so profound. But I saw a post that you had written on social media, and it was like kind of, you know, uh, reminiscent of of your experience of Fallujah and COVID. Can you say something? Because for me, uh, there were two Marines who I knew during COVID who were in Fallujah, and they ended up taking their lives during COVID, during that period of time, when you wrote that message. So that was like really interesting, and they died alone, but yeah.
So I remember the post you're talking about. I was working at a hospital at the time, so, and I would see them carry the patients that had passed away in body bags, and
Mm.
they would go into these refrigerated tractors, like the tractor trailers, and that reminded me of a place back in Fallujah called Bravo Surgical, Charlie Surgical. I'm sorry, and it was, I think it was a Navy unit that was there, and they had like those portable tents, those maintenance tents. They had a few of them side by side, and inside it was, you'd go in there, and I remember we brought back a few of the Marines from the Battle of Fallujah that had passed away. We would bring them there, and I remember going in, and they're stacking the body bags, just like, 6 high, and I'm like wow. And so that brought back those memories of that. And but for me, actually, I can only imagine the pain that these veterans are going through, because imagine yourself feeling alone, feeling like you've got no way out. And on top of that, now you're severely cut off because COVID cut off everything. It stopped every other activity. Now
VA,
you are
VA,
alone.
yeah, VA services, all of
Mhm.
it. Yep.
Everything got cut off. And if you were alone before, now you're on a deserted island. You might have as well have been. So, but for me, I will be honest, I was drowning for sure. Everything was just becoming overwhelming. And, and I was trying my best. I was trying my best at everything. And I credit my discipline because it's what when I just wanted to give up, like I was just going on autopilot. It just carried me through everything until I was ready to regain control of that stick,
Yeah.
I make a reference to jets because they go on autopilot, and then when you're ready, you take control. So that for me was take control of my life. And I'm a little ashamed to say this, but for me, COVID was the restart that I needed because everything stopped. And now I was able to focus on myself, focus on my mental health. I got in better shape, um, focus on relationships. And for me, that was the break that I needed. And it does make me sad that, that others, you know, that it went the other way for others.
Yeah. Yeah, it has mixed realities. And so yeah, I connect with what you were saying to that because I was a monk and I was used to being alone. And for me, it kind of gave me somewhat of a reset for most of COVID until towards the end of COVID. That's when, I started to I ended up getting COVID and just really screwed. I got that long COVID. But the thing is that to hear that from you is powerful because um you were able to kind of like recreate meaning in your life. And I think that that's what we can learn from you in many ways as readjusting veterans or even as civilians going through challenges.
Definitely, it was a big challenge for me, and it continues to be. But now I'm a little bit more prepared. When I
Yep.
think about where I was mentally years ago, even a few years ago, to where I am now, I'm like, I don't beat myself up as much anymore because it's a learning process, and then definitely it's about who you surround yourself with. Thankfully I had my friend Ryan Graham. I
Yeah,
had
he's a good
one of my
guy.
best friends. Yeah. So, and he's actually been a driving force too for me, an inspiration, and a lot of the things that I've done and work, and up to this point I've gotten there, you know, because of his motivation, just even some kind words,
Mhm.
it does a lot.
Yeah.
So, but for me, it's definitely that's been when I look back on it, I'm like I'm pretty amazed, and then I realize it's all I've always had it. It's always been there,
Yeah.
you just sometimes you're just blinded,
Right.
you're
Yes.
clouded. Your
So how
mind
do
is.
you so how do you feel about peer to peer? So you mentioned Ryan. Do you think peer to peer support is like important, like with veteran readjustment and reintegration, or
I
can
think
be?
I think it is simply because you can help each other out. You help each other out. Maybe something the other person says
Mhm.
is the key that you were missing, or something they say is like, man, I never thought of it that way, because we have different perspectives, different ways of seeing it. When you're in it yourself, you can't see it. You can't see anything else. But somebody else on the outside could probably step back and say, hey, this is what you're doing. This is what you should be doing or not doing, or just suggest. I'm not saying do this, do that, but just suggest, and just bounce ideas off of each other, because you never know who they might know that could also help you. They could direct you. Listen, I think you should meet this person. You got a lot of, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like peer to peer is definitely important, you know, and just surrounding yourself with good, positive people, which I've been doing for these past few years now. And like you said, like before that, I felt alone. But then, starting to surround myself with positive thinking people, and I feel like I'm a part of a. I feel like I'm a meaningful contributor to a community now. You know.
Yeah, well, you always have. It's just at times we all, you know, go in and out in resolving our issues, and so you've been there for a lot of people, and that's awesome. And yeah, I'd like to ask you. So when you were focusing, I'd also noticed that you got involved in like rucking, and how did that help you? Like what was that all about?
Well, that for me is just something that felt comfortable.
Mhm.
You know, we rocking is a big part of, or humps, as we say in the military, is
Yeah.
a big part of, it's a big part of it. It's troop movements. It teaches you, really teaches you about yourself, because you might think, oh, I can't keep going, but yeah, you can. You can pull that ounce of strength out and keep going for another 2 miles, and then those 2 miles turns to three. And like, I could do one more, But for me, something you could do alone. You could walk,
Mhm.
um, and you're getting in better shape. You're helping yourself not only mentally but physically. For me, it's what I do when I start getting, when my mind starts getting clouded, or when I start feeling depressed or things like that. I just like, let me throw my pack on and then just go. Throw my headphones in and then just go. You don't even have to have a destination. You just walk, and you and then you think about things, and then you sort it out. And it's even better when you do it with other people, you know, because and the rocking community here in New York City is very diverse.
Yeah.
You know, you've got people like Anthony Frizolone, he's a Supreme Court reporter. You got teachers, you know, and then almost a lot of the times there's a lot of overlap, and those people are also supporters of veterans. They support veteran events, support veterans. So it's a great community. Get in shape, do good things, meet great people. That's what I say.
That's an awesome message, and it's appropriate in this weekend of Memorial Day. I used to be one of those real traditionalists who would think Memorial Day is only for those who were left in the battlefield, and died there. And and it was even difficult for me to accept people who passed away, on active duty. But, that's the bottom line. Memorial Day belongs to them as well. And even throughout the years, I've learned, and through some of my research, I was maybe thinking, I shouldn't even hate on those who claim Memorial Day because their dad served, and they just died, they recently died. And, you know, well, I've learned to think that our society needs to be more in touch with veterans. And if it means that, this is just my opinion, not the views of Coming Home Well or of Edie, but if there's a way to connect society to veterans, then, who am I to judge or set, like, these strict standards of like who Memorial Day belongs to, and your connection with civilians and veterans. It's a positive thing. I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. I used to feel like that too. Like, people think that Memorial Day is just a day of sales, a day to barbecue, a free day at the beach. And they used to irritate me, and they used to get me upset. But this is what they would want, for us to go and live our lives
Mm.
as Americans in freedom. This is what they would want, for us to celebrate, you know, to really just keep in mind the sacrifices that were made. I feel like this is what they fought for, you know. So I don't. That's how I think about it now. So I don't get as upset,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. And
It
I
doesn't.
also think
Mhm.
I also think that there's been people who only focus on those over there, and I'm thinking about the COVID thing, the things that you had mentioned in your posts, and my friends and your friends, but the thing about it is that these are social deaths of veterans that are happening, and I believe that they lead to all different other types of deaths, and those need to be acknowledged during Memorial Day as well.
I believe that too. It's true, it's definitely true, because whether over there or over here, it's caused by wars. Wars just don't leave wounds that you can see. They also leave the type of wounds that you can't see. And by that, I mean the mental things, so you might be away from a war zone or a battlefield, but to you, you still feel like you're there mentally, things will remind you. Like for me, sometimes like I look at the sky, some of these sunsets remind me of the sunsets in Iraq, even,
Mm-hmm.
remind me of that. And just the evenings, the afternoons. I remember thinking to myself, like, man, such a beautiful country. All the things that are going on here.
Yeah. What would you say if there was someone getting out of the military and readjusting right now? What kind of words of advice could you give them right now?
Well, somebody readjusting, I think, and Ryan and I actually talked about this a few days ago. I feel like they definitely should get involved with a VSO, like a VF. It doesn't have to be the VFW, or just like have somebody that's like, I don't want to say mentor, but some kind of mentor figure.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that could, because that's what I was missing when I got out. It was only later on that I realized, like, man, if only somebody would have told me this, if only somebody would have told me that, if only somebody would have guided me this way. So I feel like that's the first thing they should do, and then just also seek out other veterans, seek them out. Most importantly, do the things you like to do too, because through doing those things, veterans have a lot in common. You might meet others, but definitely just seek the help. Get those VA claims going. Definitely, like, if they're planning on going to school, like, just start preparing for that before you even get out, because it all happens so fast. One year becomes, oh, I'll go next year. That becomes two. You get comfortable at a menial job like I did, and it was only after I had people pushing me, other veterans who mentored me, pushing me to, like, listen, this is what you have behind you. This is what your resume looks like. You're overqualified for this. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be driving an Uber. You shouldn't be doing security, or in a case, I found a veteran, like, he was homeless and he was picking up cans, and I'm like, let me see a resume. So me a resume, I'm like, dude, I'm gonna keep him anonymous, but I'm like, dude, you're it. So then he went, he's a consultant now. He's making good money, not here, not in New York City, in
Yeah.
another part.
Yeah. That's great. That is a great narrative. Yeah, of readjustment. Any last words? Anything you want to leave for us? Anything that I tend to, I'm always on a lot of coffee and little sleep, and I always cut people off. So I like to leave this last part to folks. Anything that was not covered that you feel that you wanted to say, or anything you want to say, please share.
Well, I feel like overall, I feel like we did cover everything. But if I would say something,
Mm-hmm.
I would say to anybody, you're not alone. We're all here for you. We're an elite select group. Less than 1% even rely on each other, and just know that you're never alone. All you have to do is ask. Sometimes pride gets in the way, ego, whatever, but set it aside, because your whole other parts of yourself will thank you for it. just look for the, yeah. I don't know. I start to get like emotional a little bit when I say things like that because I know what it did for me and I know what it could do for others,
Yeah. Well, those are words that are said by someone who has walked the road less traveled and is transcending day to day. And that's why, I really wanted to have you on. It's a huge honor to have you on, Edie Argueta, here on VOC. And thank you for being here. And hopefully I can have you on other podcasts and hear your voice in other platforms.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be featured here.
Thank you. And be well and go well.
Do well, right? Yeah.
And do well. That's right. That was the other one. That's
Yeah.
right. And do well. Be well, go well, and do well.
Yes.
Veterans of Color invites you to join us again with your host, Mike Kim. If the content from this podcast is informative to you, it would be appreciated if you share the podcast with others. Give a like, post something you learned from the episode on social media. If interested in other truly informative podcasts like Veterans of Color, check out the site cominghomewell.com for a listing of other veteran-based podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.